Hello, and this is Conversations from the Alcove from the Lucille Lortel Theater. The Alcove is the new play development program, and I am its artistic director, and my name is Caridad Svich, and I'm a playwright. And I am currently beaming in from the land of Lenape. And I'll do a brief audio description, which is I am fair-skinned, I have brown eyes, brown auburnish hair. Right now it's pulled up to the back, but I have bangs up front, and I'm wearing glasses. They're big, round, tortoiseshell rim glasses. I have red lipstick, and I'm wearing a black top with a very colorful scarf in the shades of green and yellow. You wouldn't see it on your end, but it's actually the yellow is a tiger. It's hiding in my scarf. And also my background is white, but you might see a lamp in one corner of the screen. It's a real lamp, and it is just standing there, but it's not lit at the moment. And today's guest, after all of that, is the wonderful playwright and theater maker, Matthew Paul Olmos. Brief description of Matt. They're a playwright from Los Angeles, California, specifically Montebello, which is like very nice to know. Not a lot of playwrights from Montebello, so it's really lovely. They've lived, of course, in other cities, but they're based now in California. They're known for a lot of plays, including The Living Life of the Daughter Mira. There are 3-play cycle, So Go the Ghosts of Mexico. They premiered recently. By the time this airs, it won't be as recent, but a play called Home But Howls at Steppenwolf Theater. So they have a ambitious, wide-ranging body of work, which I'm excited to dive into today, even just at the surface. And I want to hand it over to Matt.
Hello, really lovely to be here. I haven't seen you actually, Caridad, in a while since I'm not in New York any longer. But I am beaming in from Los Angeles, where I'm at located now after years in New York. And you want me to describe like the background or image?
Yes, please.
Yeah, great. So brown hair, brown eyes. I have sort of black top rim glasses, a bit of stubble that I now use, I guess, after the pandemic. A gray shirt, and then my background has sort of white bookcase with a lot of research stuff behind me. So that's what I look like here.
Ooh, research stuff. Oh, temptations. Okay. Would love to know more a little bit about that if you're willing to divulge at some point in our chat. I start all these chats with the same question, which is we are, of course, living in a climate crisis, and I wonder how this is affecting your art making, the thinking about it, the making of it itself, and concerns about subject matter, form, and all the things.
Yeah, when I think about that idea, of course, one part of my brain goes immediately to like, the works I've done where they do deal specifically with something environmental. But when I think about like my body of work, something I think a lot about is it seems like I tend to focus on the United States in terms of how they impact the actual earth, how they impact communities within this country, how they impact other countries in the world balance. And when I was thinking about this, I think one of the reasons why I sort of I need to sort of hone in and focus on something a bit like I need something to discuss that's a little bit unanswerable. Like when I think a couple of plays I've worked on where I did talk about something very specific to climate change, for instance, I struggled with them a little bit because I think that there was a solution. There was like an actual thing that could be done and obviously should be done. And it's sort of like, I don't know if it painted me in a corner or I felt a little constricted because I was like, well, here's the thing we should be doing. And I didn't want the play to feel like I'm preaching. But the US plays that I'm talking about, almost the same thing, but like, the things that are being done to sort of inhibit our future, they feel a bit more unanswerable. It almost feels like I can keep asking why and further why and get deeper and deeper. And like, I'll never get to an answer, and the plays don't have an answer themselves, but it almost feels like, oh, when I think about some of these larger things like that, I need to almost have this sort of nebulous space of like gray where like, we will never know this, but let's just explore for exploring's sake. And I think my plays tend to work a little better if there's explorations and posing questions and like bringing things to the table in a dialogue. But I don't know if I'm skilled at having like, there's a really big solution over here that we should all be doing. And I don't know how to approach it as well because it feels like, yeah, then the writing to me, even my own writing where I like the language of it, will start to feel like, oh, now I'm telling the audience something and I'm like trying to get them to think something. And then I pull back because I'm like, that doesn't really, it doesn't feel as strong, I think, as the ones where it's like, I don't have an answer. I don't have any sort of solution here, but like, here's a bunch of things that we're all implicated in, that I'm implicated in, that we're all doing, and we need to like talk about this stuff, even though we don't literally have like, here's A, B, C that could be done. So yeah, when you posed that question, my immediate thought was like, oh wow, I think about the U.S. And my judgment of that, as almost metaphorically, as like, it is a bigger example of what we are doing as humankind. Because I think also because the U.S. leads so many things, it does feel like I'm talking about also like just the harm we do to the actual ground that we're on. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the U.S. is one of the largest polluters actually on the earth on multiple levels, including its relationship to war and the war machine, which is of course part of ecocide. So, but I wonder if I'm also curious. So maybe not just around subject matter, but also around the materials that you use. I mean, are you thinking differently about the theatricality of your work in relationship to the climate crisis? Like how many, like I just did a piece where, like it's not fully done, but I did a workshop of it, I should say, for people in New Playland. Plays have readings and workshops. Okay, so I will say that, I was very conscious about what are the elements, what are the least amount of elements with which I could do this play? And I sort of made like a list of materials, a chair, a pen, and I put those at the front of the script as a sort of provocation to say, this could all potentially fit in a suitcase, and maybe if you just have a chair on hand, that would be great. But as a way of starting to think about like thinking sustainably, because the theater industry is also an incredible polluter, about how we can actually make things with less and still be imaginative, and of course wonderful, because theater is about the imagination. So I just wonder if you're thinking about your materials as well.
No, it's interesting because like, thinking about your work, thinking about my work, like I think even, I would say just early on, like, this wasn't even a thought in my head at all, but like thinking about the kind of work we both do, it's always been this thing where it requires, there's imagination. I can't literally have 1,000 unicorns run across the stage, but like we can do something here. So it's interesting the way you describe that, where like, I feel like certain artists, I think we're both similar in that way of like, have always relied on the sort of imagination of the audience and sort of like, no, I don't literally want to do some of this stuff. These are like, I think of stage directions a lot as being like invitations to other collaborators, other artists to be like, oh, like we're not going to do that. Obviously, we're not going to do that literally, but we are going to do something in line with that. So, because I think I've always sort of thought of my stuff, and I don't know if the sort of doability of a theater or a theater may not wanting to do a 10-person, 8 set changes play of mine is probably in there somewhere subconsciously also. But just on a very basic level, I've always thought of it being like, I saw the Lehman trilogy finally a couple of years ago, and that one, this version actually has a bad example because it actually has a lot of changes. But technically, the play could be done just with they're just storytellers on stage, and that was really my real draw to it. Was like, oh wow, yeah, right, getting back to just like that's it. We can use our imagination, and then we can tell a very, very vivid, theatrical, huge story without, like, to your point, having to be like, wow, this play requires, remember they used to put in like scripts, like here's a list of all the stuff you need. Actually, that I don't want you to do as the author, but I love your idea of just like, no, actually, technically, we only need these things, and the rest is really just imagination of artists, imagination of audience. I don't think about it necessarily like writing it out, but I think that's really fascinating because I'm curious what my plays actually do look like on that sort of list. But it's interesting that you're one thinking about it, and then that we're talking about it because we both, I think, embrace and rely on imagination and theatricality, and not also, but also at the same time, I feel like neither of us, and lots of writers obviously, but like I don't think are limited themselves like, oh well, we can't do that, so I won't do it. It just feels like no, I'm going to let my imagination soar and let the artists find what they will. As opposed to, I definitely hear a lot of younger students that when I'm teaching and stuff, where they're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have this in there because can they bring a sofa? And I'm like, don't, just think about the world of the play and like how you vision it. We'll figure out how to do it,
Yeah, totally. And I think that, I was talking to a student this week, and it was sort of funny because, oh my gosh, okay. So they went to see, I won't say what the show was, but they went to see a show, which was very much like it's in your imagination and the actors are telling the story. And of course, the design, the lighting design and the sound design is also part of that storytelling and the direction. But and they came out of it and they were like, don't understand because it didn't have a big set. So what was I supposed to look at? And I was like, it's actually like, it is about bodies in space, and it is about, I guess because I think a lot about how dance theater works, and yes, there's some dance theater that's very like overtly design heavy in terms of scenic design, but often it really just is about light and sound and some sort of atmospheric sense of the space. And really focusing on the bodies, these sort of bodies in motion and how they relate to one another. And in theater, we do that too, and so, but it was sort of fascinating because I felt like what they were saying to me was the scenic design is there to distract us from the play. And I was like, no, that's not what scenic design does. It's actually organic to the storytelling. And there are actually a reason why, let's say, that particular production wanted to do something that wasn't like with a heavy set or something that was more, photorealistic in terms of what they were depicting. But it's interesting how the expectation around, I think it might have to do with an expectation of the spectacular, that you somehow walk into a space and it's going to blow you away, right? But I also think that the spectacular is in your brain. It's like what you hear and like what the play evokes. And yes, of course, there are moments of spectacles in plays. Like that's something that's in our wheelhouse as writers that we can craft. But I think that I just have like, it's interesting to think about like how people think about spectacle and theatricality and theater in relationship, in this kind of triangular relationship when really we're just imagining it all, And I think I've lost your sound right now.
I think there's examples, right? With also there is like a big. I remember seeing. I think it was called Dance of the Vampires. Like, it was a big musical. This is probably like early 2000s, somewhere around there. But like, whatever. It wasn't my favorite show, right? But there is this huge staircase that comes on stage at the end, and it splits apart, and like, it did feel probably in some ways they're probably aware what show they had, right? And so like there is probably a little pull to like, well, we can still go big, we can still like wow audiences. And like I remember, I don't remember the story at all, but I remember there was a big staircase that split apart. So that I wonder if people are watching some things like that and they are thinking like, oh well, maybe almost like in it's like a film that has, a bunch of action sequence, whatever it is, like obviously covering up, like there's not much of a story here. There's no characters, but we can continually do these things,
Yeah, the thing that propels us is this. I have a soft spot for action films only because I love the choreography of a lot of those stunts, and I just think it's kind of stunning to be able to coordinate all of that. I also, of course, part of my brain is also thinking about how much it costs and how much waste is happening because of that as well. So there's that other part of it, which we won't get into at the moment, however, but I'll just float it in the air for a second. I wanted to shift a little bit more specifically to your plays that you've written. Most obviously, I don't think this is the most recent play you've written, because you write so much, Matt. We are like in competition with one another about how many plays we write. But there is this way.
You're always be ahead though. You're like,
no,
seem to be always prolific in a way that I'm like
neck and neck. Wow. We're neck and neck. I love it. It's like when Erica and I used to be like, which play are you on now? And we were like, I'm on this one. Which one are you on? A Home with Howls, which premiered at Steppenwolf. It's a very big deal, I think, especially for Latina artists, because they often, they haven't in their long illustrious history, haven't featured that many Latina artists. So yay. But more importantly to your play and like its positioning there, and also you've just come out of a production process with it. And I wonder, what led to it, to tell us a little bit about it and so forth, but also the play's relationship to the audience in Chicago and how that experience was for you.
Yeah, actually, like Steppenwolf was, I remember years ago, it had to be 2010s area. I was in Chicago for something else, and I went to Steppenwolf just to meet with them, whatever. And this is, a whole different team was there. But I remember at the end of the meeting, of course, in my brain, I was like excited to be there, whatever. But I remember it was kind of just a general lit meeting. They kind of were very blunt and honest with it. At the end of the meeting, they were like, just so you know, that, but we do shows for our ensemble. And they made sort of almost a joke of like, and if you look at our ensemble, we're basically saying, if you have a play that could fit them, please send it to us. I mean, send us all your plays, but just, this is what we're working with right now. And we're trying very hard to like make that ensemble a little bit more, expansive. And so I kind of always just like, well, if I ever do have a play like that, I'll definitely like push for it there. But so I didn't think much of it, more just like that was pretty cool. I went to a show there and I was all excited. So I was actually when I got an original email from Steppenwolf, they had seen my play at Ojai, that they were interested. I don't know if you do this thing, like I'll sometimes like, I don't really believe things until they're like happening. So I almost thought that maybe they meant someone else in the Ojai lineup. So I think I was very aware of that. And like, I think in general, I think I have a little bit of a thing where if it's a larger institution, I'm kind of excited I'm there. And like, but a part of me also, like, I think subconsciously, I'm almost too aware of it being like, oh, like this means something to be here. Like, I'm excited to be here. I really want to do well here. And I think it affects me a little bit in terms of like expectations, where I'm like, oh, like it's Steppenwolf, so it's going to be like this amazingly clean, perfect, streamlined, best version of my work ever seen. And I think back to older productions of other plays, and I'm like, oh, I love that one, I love this one. But when I really think about, at least for me, all my productions, there's always been a huge amount of challenges. They're all like, I'm like, oh, that play I really loved. Oh wait, actually, that was not our first choice for that lead part, or like that like. There's a story where when I was at Cherry Lane, and there's this moment in this play called Three Girls That Were Running for the Way Home, where these three lead characters, these three young girls, are supposed to experience rain for the first time. It's supposed to come down on them, and then the world that they're in is going to look at them and be like, how have you never experienced rain before? Like, where do you come from? These girls from the other side of the tracks. And when we got to production, we had this rain thing that was going to be built, and we're going to have rain come down. It's going to be a beautiful thing. And then budget-wise, when it came down to it, it was like, we can have the rain thing, but that's going to take up most of our budget. And it's only like a 45-second scene in the play. So we had to very heartbreakingly be like, I guess we lose the rain machine. And we ended up doing like buckets on the side of the stage where the actors sort of would reach the side of the stage, get water, and they'd sort of have like almost like a water fight. And it still worked. But my memory of the production is like, oh, everything was beautiful. But when I really go back and look at some productions, like there's just the everyday challenges we had every production has, the disappointment, things you didn't get, things you weren't aware of, And so I think some of my time when I was at Steppenwolf, I was torn between the expectation of like, oh, I'm so excited to be here, and then forgetting like, oh no, we're still going to have issues. We're still going to have things that we have to figure out. And so I think towards the end, I actually wrote to Luis Alfaro because I was feeling nervous, like, oh, now I'm getting nervous about the play going up. I'm nervous if it's in shape, whatever. And he was just kind of telling me like, hey, remember that, you belong there. Like you're there. You're not by accident, right? But also that, the almost like as playwrights, or I guess any artist, our rehearsal process is almost like lifelong. It's like, what do you learn in the entire way as an artist of how you do your work, how you collaborate? Like, to think of it as not just one isolated thing, but you're still on the journey you've had from your first rehearsal process all the way through the next future ones. And when I kind of like put it in perspective a little bit, I was able to enjoy the process more and be like, oh, okay, this isn't magically different because it's Steppenwolf, and I deserve to be here. And yeah, I'm learning about how I communicate my work, learning how I collaborate with people, and no different than I would if I was at a different theater. So it was challenging in that way for me, because I had almost had to get my head around like not letting the prestige of it for me take over, and just be like, no, just be in the process and be like there. So I think it's fascinating, because like, as much as I'm like excited that this thing happened and it's been out there, really what I think about now is like, oh, I went through all these sort of learning things as I was there, as a writer, as a person in the room. And like, also like, I was talking about this a lot recently, like I think it's kind of funny that as playwrights, like, I don't know, like, I know your work, Caridad, but I don't know like what you're like in the room. I mean, I might know a little bit from Lark, but like, I don't really know what you're like in the room with a director, with a cast. I don't know what we like in the room with a cast. And like, that's something that like we spend a lot of time doing, but we never talk about it. And like, we never like, we don't teach it. And like, it's funny that like, I have no idea what certain artists are doing in the room. I think part of the reason I thought about it is because during that process, I started to think about like, oh, wait, like, yeah, what do I, how am I in the room? What do I talk about? What am I more collaborative with? Like, and I feel like I needed like another playwright in the room, actually, to be like, okay, I'm not crazy. Yeah. No, that's not working. And like, oh yeah, you're right. That's totally working. I need to like, that's a really good rewrite now. I should just do that, So I thought about this whole fantastical thing of like, kind of like New Dramatists, like, if I get a resource playwright in the room, I would just feel a little at ease and be like, okay. There's another writer here who's watching this with the same eyes. So that's my sort of a big like takeaway when I think about the experience.
Yeah. I think rehearsals. I think we all function differently in rehearsals, and also it depends on the play.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like I think earlier in my career, um, oh my heavens, when I think of some of the things I did in rehearsal, I was very like, I don't know if you've gone through this, Matt, where I was just very like, the line has to be said like this, and there's a full stop, and then there's a comma, and there's a
Mm.
thing, and it has to be perfect, and like, which I still believe in, by the way, but I'm not as like dictatorial about it, and also impatient. I think it has to do with patience more than anything, because I think you have to understand that actors are in a different place in their process, and everybody's coming to you. You may have lived with the play for a number of years, but everyone in the room probably hasn't, and so they're kind of like finding their way, which is also incredibly exciting. They're teaching you what they see in the play. But there's also that thing of like, oh, I just know if we should do this.
Mm.
But what was interesting is that I was thinking about this, and I don't know if you've experienced this as a playwright and working in rehearsal. I did a project with the wonderful people at Theater in Quarantine, Josh William Galb and Katie Rose McLaughlin, 2 years ago, and they start with tech. So like I had written they were like, you want to write something for us? And I was like, yes, I still want to write something for you, because I was such a super fan of theirs. And so I wrote something, and then they were like, rehearsal starts something. I was like, great, I go to rehearsal. And then we start rehearsal, and I expected, I think, because we're text people, I was like, we'll start by reading the play, and then we'll do. And then Josh was like, okay, I have like 50 looks I want to show you. He went through this whole like design thing, and like movement design, and like he showed me I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this with a computer, I can do that with a camera, I can swing myself over here, I can create a little room here. I was like, which one of these shall we play with? And I was like, oh, this is awesome, I love this. And also it just made the text kind of just material, which is so exciting. And we got to a point where literally we rehearsed for about, oh my gosh, was it 10 days or so? So we rehearsed for 10 days, and we put it up on the 10th day. So that's like a super fast process. In those 10 days, the iterations, we did a version that was like outside, where we were filming somebody, and the text was voiceover, and we were just following down the East Village with the camera. We did another version where it was just two people in a room, and they were kind of like speaking the text, but we were also hearing other things on the side. We did another version where we spliced two people and like video work that had been filmed outside into the. We did so many different. We changed the choreography, I don't know how many times, and it was like, and I was like, this is the way it should always be. This is so much fun. And I think that what I'm saying about this is that I think that tech comes often for a lot of us who work in more conventional places. The design element, the sort of technological element of realizing the vision of the show comes late into the process. But actually, I think there's something quite liberating about starting there as a writer. And I don't know if you've ever worked that way, or I don't know if you have thoughts in this direction.
I haven't, but I mean, it almost, when you describe it, it sounds like, playwright Candyland. It's just like, oh, here's what we have. Because I feel like, it's so like it's so often the story of like, not here's what we don't have, but like, here's how we can do it. And you're like, right. Oh, I remember very early on, I was in grad school still, and I had this sort of absurdist play, which was my thesis, and there was supposed to be someone comes on stage, and they're just like buckets of blood, like more than ridiculous amount, like too much. And I'm still early. I'm still like, exploring how I work and what, all this stuff. But I remember the design team, and they were very much like, they were sort of almost like staff, and we were students. So there's a little bit of like hierarchy that I don't think was very healthy, but they basically could do like a couple of stained red gloves. They could do a smear of blood here, and they could do some blood, like, pre-put on the outfit a little bit. Not at all what I was looking for, and because in that one I was like, well, that could happen. Like, that looks like that could have happened. The other one looks like, what in the world happened? Like, that's not possible. There's too much blood. So it was almost like missing the narrative also, but I think also I was young and I was just sort of rebellious, but I remember it was one of my first introductions to tech, which was, oh, okay. And I feel like there's also tons of stories where it's like, whoa, I love walking into the tech space and being like, this is insane, this is amazing, and like there's excitement. But there's also, I think, other stories, but I think it's amazing, the idea, even when you just sort of devise stuff and you're just sort of playing around with stuff, how much I think it opens up a certain element of the writer brain to be somewhere. Like I love actually when I've had, usually residencies only though, or workshops, where you do have a designer there and a director and you're sort of all just collaborating, devising something, because it does feel a little bit like writer wise, like, oh, he's all things I can play with, like, oh yeah, yes, I can, with that in mind. That puts me in a different space than just me at my house, whatever it is, typing on a blank page. It's like, I know I have this like weird map over here that I can use. So like, I think that should be actually like taught, right? And like expand how we even think about our writing. Because you might like, start thinking about like, I'm just gonna meet with a designer and like talk about some stuff and see what's possible. And then I'll go back and start thinking about, text.
Yeah, totally. Seeing what's possible, right? And that way you know the parameters, but also one of the interesting conversations of working with Josh and Katie Rose was around, but if you don't like any of these 50 choices, we'll think of other ones. You know what I mean? Like it was very like, well, this is day one, but also we can change along the way, which, because I thought for a minute, I just remember being like, oh, my only choices are these 50 choices. You know what I mean? A part of my brain was like, I guess that's it, and then I realized, oh no, they're open to like, this is just like a starting floor. So I just found that, and it made me, but it also made me sad because I think not all processes are like that. And I was like, I want them all to be like this. I want to start. It's like when I was reading about Katie Mitchell, the director, she does a lot of projects using this technique that she's developed called live cinema, where they're basically, it's almost like filming something live on stage and showing all the mechanics of it and everything. And she does this as well. Like the whole design team, because it's a live cinema, they have to rehearse it from day one. They have to start that conversation from day one. And I was like, oh, this is my dream. I want that so bad. Also because I think that design is dramaturgy, and I think that so many plays, new plays, oh my heavens, I think about like how the imprimatur of a first production, a premiere, for example, is often tied, in people's memories to that scenic design or to that sound design or to that how it was first realized. When actually that was just those choices made on that production, But then you'll see, I'm sure you know this, right? You'll see like subsequent productions of that show, and they all kind of look like that first production in the show. And you're like, but why? Like those people in that room made those decisions. That's not you in your other room somewhere else, right? So
I remember being shocked when I read the actual script for Pillow Man. Haven't seen the one in New York because when they really visualized all the monologues, and you're like, oh, I love the play, but it's like, it's just monologues. Like, the scenes, but like the scenes that were so impactful on the stage were like, you're watching this sort of like circus thing unfold almost in front of you while you're hearing this beautiful monologue. And then, I almost can't, I've never seen another production of it, but I can't imagine it without that actually. Because reading it, oh, wow, he just wrote these long things and they transformed it into that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally. I want to, speaking of design and language and rehearsals and being writers and all those things, your work is so wonderful on many levels, both it's poetry, literally how people speak and what the rhetorics of it, but the visual poetry of your work as well. There's images that we see and imagine, but also your way with form. And I think there was a very facetious comment yesterday online. I won't say who it was, but they said something. I think it was a joke, question mark. But I don't know really. But they said something facetious like, "Oh, enough with people saying they're playing with form, and enough with people saying nonlinear." Blah, 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 And I was like, "Oh my God, how boring." Anyway, so all I'm going to say is one of the things we do as writers for the theaters, we are playing with form. This is what we do. This is actually our MO. And the form involves how we work with space and time, right? So I'm thinking about how you approach each project, like what formal ideas guide your process on each show. Do you start there? Is that something you discover along the way?
Yeah, it's funny. I was actually just I was doing a writers group out here, and we had this really experienced writer come in just to sort of chat about things that they've discovered along their way, and they decided to talk about structure. And something I found really fascinating. And I was actually kind of like, almost like taking notes because I want, I can teach what I do to other students, I think, when I teach in my process, but I'm not that privy to like how other writers obviously have process. So this writer was just talking about how they approach structure and how they really put structure first. And they sort of like pick a structure and then sort of fill it in, almost like taking the house and filling it. But I was fascinated because it's so different from what I do. And I was like, I can't even fathom like thinking about a structure than trying to like put something inside it. For me, it's very much structure is one of those words where like I almost don't want to think about it because like I'm worried. I don't know how to approach that. It reminded me a little bit of I thought of the example. It's like in your 20s or something. Look, you don't want to look at your bank account because you're scared what the balance is or something. But when I think about it, like by this point, and I've thought about this a lot recently in terms of like just how I work, and I feel like in some ways I'm curious how you do this. I'm almost like digging deeper into like how I work in it like it used to start out like I would research a little bit, and I would feel just I want to know more about something before I wrote about it, or even if it's a family drama, I want to dig more into either the actual family or how those kind of families function in this country. Like I just want to know more about the topic, even though it's a very personal story or something. But at this point, like you mentioned about writing a lot of plays, like I find it odd that people have that impression of me because like it takes me now a year or two to write a play, and a bulk of that is just me researching really deeply about whatever the thing is. And then, oh, sorry, there's like a sound.
Yes, I think it's mine, but don't worry about it.
Okay, great.
I'll deal with it. Yeah.
So yeah, at this point, I spend 1 to 2 years writing a play, but a lot of that is research. And like I've actually tried to go back and like write a play just like me writing it. And I feel like naked or something if I don't have all this sort of research surrounding me. And like I don't actually always use the research; it's just like there, almost like a comfort or something. And then when I start writing, I kind of have to drop all of it and not look back at it. I have to just sort of like I have to trust that whatever is in the research that's interesting to me or relevant was inside me, and then I'll actually just start writing my own story, riffing on whatever I'm talking about. But it's weird because I can't go back on that, and like it's just part of my thing now. I know that like, all right, I'm going to start this play, but I know it won't be done until this time next year because that's how long it's going to take me to get through all of it. And then honestly, from that, after that huge sort of like setup, then after dropping all the research, then I just start following impulse. And I feel like I'm curious if you're similar in this way where I'm not thinking too much. I'm just like writing. And so like if I'm typing away and I'm like some magic music comes out of a car, I'm like, okay, this car has no engine, but there's music coming out of it. I don't know what that means yet. And like, I'll even get to, basically a first draft or even a first reading with public. And the actors will be asking me like, so what is the music? And I'm still in that state of like, I don't know totally. Like, I know it's there. I know it's part of our thing, but I couldn't articulate what it actually is yet. And it takes me some time during rehearsals to really be like, to unpack a lot of the subconscious choices I've made. And I'm embracing the idea of like, I used to be scared of, I think, talking about when we were younger, like in rehearsal rooms. I think I always thought I had an answer for everything. And now I'm very embracing of like, that's interesting. I don't know. Yeah, maybe. Could be. Sounds like it feels like this. I never say like it's this. I'm always like, it seems like this or it feels like this because I'm trying to just keep the room open where it's like, I don't know, let's all figure this out together because I don't actually know. I have an impulse, but that's kind of sometimes as far as I go. So mine feels, even to this day, it's very, very structured in, I guess, research, but then it's just impulsive all the way through until I have a draft and I'm like, what is this? Okay, this happens. But I want to, for you, because I think you have a similarity in terms of like we're in a sort of heightened space often, and we're sort of like there is a sort of they're talking in a very specific way, a specific world. Are you? I'm assuming you're not planning that stuff. It's sort of just coming out of you.
It depends. I think that early on, it was all impulse. Like literally, like I was like, oh no, well, I'm writing a play. I guess it's the play that does this. But I think that one of the things that I've lean on more, maybe it started early. I don't know. It's hard to say, but like after I worked with Irene Fornes, I thought the work that I did under Irene's guidance was very, I think because I was just I had just come out of grad school. So my brain was kind of like, I didn't know, like really, part of me knew where I was. I didn't know really what I wanted to do as a theater artist. And so I was a little bit scattered. So it was all impulse. And then after I worked with Irene, I wanted to take stock of like, how do I make things? Because I suddenly felt like I still felt a little bit like I had just gotten out of grad school. So I was like, I don't know what I'm doing with my life as a writer, and one of the things that freed me up was to think of plays like radio plays. So like when I wrote Alchemy of Desire, Dead Man's Blues, I was like, first of all, I was so angry at theater. I was like, no more theater. I hate theater. Go away. Goodbye. I hate you. Stop telling me what to do. It's really like, stop telling me what to do. Like, I'm such a like rebel. And so I was like, I'm just going to write a radio play, because in a radio play, you can imagine everything. And it's guided by like what you hear, so I was like, great, that's the space I want to be in. And then I knew that I wanted to write something that had the feeling of like a blues song, or that had that around it. So I think for me, it actually starts sometimes with music. Like when I wrote 12 Ophelias, I was like, I mean, many things were on my mind, but one of them was like, so cool. It would be so cool to write a play that felt like a bluegrass song. Let me see if I can write like a play that does that, and I was already thinking about Ophelia, and I thought, okay, this is going to be some sort of smash up of like Appalachia, Ophelia, Resurrection, and then we'll sort of see what happens. And then in the writing process itself, I just chase it down, follow it wherever it wants to go. But I have that frame in mind. But more recently, I've been working a lot with it. It's been kind of like surprising, I think, because I don't think that I used to think this way before, which is that I'm thinking a lot about literally what the form of it is. Like, is it an installation? Is it a quiz show? Is it a stand-up routine? Is it I'm thinking very specifically about those things, and sometimes it's a combination of those things, but like, that for me, that becomes the guiding principle, and that becomes the way in. And until I have that, I feel like I can't write. Like, I was like, there was this play that I worked on called The Brick, which I'd been thinking about for a very, very long time. And it's a play about the Chicago boys and neoliberalism. And that particular iteration of it, of course, that we're living in today, still at its peak. And I thought for a number of years, I was like, I know this is a play. It has to be a play, but I also knew that I didn't want it to be the kind of play that you might expect, which is, David Hare writes Stuff Happens, and people are in a boardroom and they're all talking to each other, being the characters, being Milton Friedman and being whatever. And so I was like, no, I don't want to write that kind of play because, who cares? But I did want to make something that was theatrical and exciting. So oh my God, what do I do? And then I was like, but I've been writing a bunch of plays, and then I was like, oh, it's a museum. And then I just knew instantly. And then I was like, great, I know what that is. And I'm such a lover of archive, so I think that I was like, great, it's a museum. And then there are these digital ghosts. And then I was like, game on, let's play. So that was like, that became my way in. And I tend to, like, whenever I theater a love story, I wanted to write something that felt like an installation. This play is sort of installing itself around you, but also in your soul and your mind. And another play I wrote recently is like a catalog. And I said, how do you stage a catalog, right? So I've been thinking a lot about those kind of things, which maybe partly it comes from them thinking about them as visual art pieces, but also thinking about them through the lens of the poetic, through the lens of poetry. How poets often go, is it a sonnet? Is it this? Is it this? And for me, that's sort of a great way in. So even thinking about genre, sometimes it'll be like, does it feel like a Western? I'm obviously not going to write it the way somebody else writes a Western because I'm me, right? So, but that sort of helps me think about like, okay, what are the expectations around this genre? Like, how will an audience relate to it, right? So a lot of it has to do with the relationship to the audience. So if it's a museum, then an audience understands what being a viewer at a museum is, but also they view differently than they would if they were like at an amusement park ride, right? So I think that way more and more. And until I have that, oh my God, the play I just wrote, I was like going bananas because I couldn't figure it out. I was like, I have this and I have this and I don't know what to do. And then suddenly I realized what the container was. And I was like, yes, I know exactly what it is now. Now I can play. Now I can do that thing of following my impulses because I know what the frame is.
No, it's funny because like as you're saying that, it made me think also like something that just happened actually with the Home on House play is that I knew there was something to do with like almost like a Grapes of Wrath sort of influence on the play. So I started like, I even went up to Salinas and like hung out there and like tried to take that in, and like I'm just on this sort of Steinbeck kick. And then I'm rewatching, you know, it's one of my favorite things. I'm rewatching the Grapes of Wrath, and in one particular scene, the lighting is kind of dark in a certain way. And as I'm watching it, I was like, oh wait, like that whole storyline in my play is a nightmare. It's a nightmare. It's been a nightmare. I didn't know why I didn't see it before, but it's a nightmare. And so like sometimes it like I go back to research because like some what you're saying, I'm searching for something is like either missing or I'm not sure what it is here, or it's nebulous. And when I go back to research and just sort of look at it just to spend some time, and I'm like, oh, it sounds like too much of like luck of the draw, but like every single time something will pop and I'll be like, oh my God, that's the thing. And I go back, I can start writing again. So it's almost like I do the research and then I sit it down, and then but if I get lost, I can kind of go back to it and be like, oh, wait a second. I'm getting a little bit lost here. Let me just dig in a little bit more. Maybe there's something I missed or haven't gotten to yet, you know?
Yeah. In terms of language and experimentation, I mean, how cautious of you, is it also impulsive for you? Like, are you like, or are you more like this play is in a vernacular and this play is not, and this one, you know, how do you go about it in terms of the linguistic terrain?
Yeah, I think about this a lot because, you know, I now do a class on dialogue where in order to do the class, I submitted it as an idea for a class before I thought about how to do that. And so I had to back up as when they said, okay. And I had to like break down, like, again, like probably what you do also, like most of it is impulsive. Like I just sort of impulsively write dialogue in a certain way, not necessarily the linguistics of it, but like either whether it's subtext or how I'm using exposition, like all the just sort of tools of it. I don't like step back and just think like, okay, here's what I'm doing. I can look it on the page. Okay, so I had to like step back and be like, all right, I'm kind of doing this. I'm kind of like wrapping up the exposition in this sort of objective, you know, whatever, all the sort of tools of it. So I do this class on I have it now perfected where it's pretty good. I can sort of like, it's not like how I write, but I'm breaking down how you could look at some of this stuff. But the one part that comes up always is like rhythm or style, if you will. And I bring it up all the time, but I sort of leave it a little bit as like, I don't know if that can be taught. I don't know if I can really like even backtrack or break down how I do that, because it just feels like I just sort of like it comes out. So I do it a lot by world. I know the world a lot. I know what sort of some of that's from research. So I know the world very much. And then a certain sort of style of speaking will come out of that. And I don't think about it too much, except in rewrites, I'll realize like, oh no, that sometimes even lines will be like, no, they wouldn't say it that way. This other person would say it that way. And then I get a little bit lost, but I think about it a lot because I almost don't know what it is. It's sort of like, it just comes out and I sort of like, I can fuss with it and perfect it once we get into rewrites and rehearsals. But I always wonder this thing of like, can language be taught? Can you teach someone who doesn't, whatever the thing is, right? Like in yours, there's obviously poetry. Like, have you ever taught it?
I teach a lot, but I don't teach this because I don't think it can be taught. But what I will say is that what can be taught around it. So when I was in oh my gosh, when I was an undergrad, and I thought it might be a playwright, like I was like, oh, I think this is something that I'm interested in. And it was starting to become clearer and clearer that that's what I wanted to do. I did an independent study class that I proposed, obviously, where I just took the work of Sam Shepard, the work of Samuel Beckett, and the work of Tom Stoppard, kind of selected plays from their, obviously they had bodies of work, so selected plays from their repertoires and just analyzed them for their rhythm. So I literally broke them down in terms of like line by line, the meter, the tempo, and just went through and then just did a compare and contrast. And so it was looking at the sort of the skeleton of the plays, really, without thinking about subject matter, without thinking about what does the line mean. It was more like, what does it sound like, and what is it doing in terms of its, is it an I am? Because sometimes they are, right? You know what I mean? And so playing with it that way, and then that actually sort of taught me. I'm not going to say everything, but I think that it was a way in. It was like, oh, if you think about it as music, then of course the world of it and how people speak in it, and if there are characters or if they're not characters, or if they're rocks or they're stones or they're puppets or whatever they're doing, they're going to have a vocabulary of some kind. But it freed me up from thinking about it around the content of a line. and more just the sonics of a line. And so I think that you can teach, actually, because you can't break it down. You can't teach how you do it, I think, is the thing. Like, I think you can't teach a writer, okay, you do you. I think that you can't do, actually. But often I think there's this exercise which I love, and I may have mentioned it on this series before, but so forgive me for anybody who's listening out in the world. Simon Stevens does this exercise with students where on the first day of class, when he teaches, where he has them transcribe the cherry orchard. Take a translation of the cherry orchard and just transcribe it longhand. Just write it, you know, line by line, like not even, like it's just copying, you're just copying, but write the whole play out. And he said, by the time you do that, you'll have Chekhov in your veins. And I was like, that's so true. That's so true, because what you're doing is like, you know, I work as a translator too. So it's like that thing of when you're inside a text and when you realize what a writer's rhythms are and how they even move through scenes and how they negotiate creative problems, that becomes part of your arsenal as a writer. And that, I think that thing of like mimicry, that thing of copying, is something you can teach, because it's, you know, you can do it. It's like covering a song, right? And then I think you learn from that. You go, well, actually, that's cool. I know I'm mimicking now. How do I stop doing that and become myself? How do I figure out like my way around that? And I think that's a journey for writers. It doesn't happen early. Very rarely does it happen early, actually.
Well, it's funny because, like, you know, when you mentioned, you know, in your veins or having it in your bones, like thinking back, even when I was a kid, before any of this, you know, probably like junior high age, I was always, I mean, everyone probably does some version of this, but, you know, I would, the songs that I liked, I liked the songs, but I was particularly drawn to the words, obviously. But I would actually write them out longhand. I would write out all the words because I was curious how they looked on the page. I was curious like what specific word they were, and spending years doing it. And my first attempts at writing were actually replacing those lyrics with my lyrics, same exact meter, same everything, but I'm putting my own words, and they were terrible words. But I guess I was drawn to, and it sounds like when you were talking about this, you were also just the fact that you did some of those things with like Shepherd and stuff, that you were drawn to rhythm and how language was. So I feel like that might also be, I've always thought actually like, I'm always curious. I'm still to this day curious, like to see words, even though they don't always work as well as text as they do in the song, obviously. But I'm still always like, it's on my mind a lot. Like sometimes like I'll just be caught by like, oh, that phrase, that little thing they did right there, that was cool. I like that. So like, I almost think in some ways, like it can't be taught in some ways from my end, because I do have a lifetime of just like paying a very, very, very close attention to like literally like, oh, that word choice. And even like today, like stand-up comedians I love watching, because like the ones who are especially like surgical, where they're like, they're aware they get a laugh on this word, you take that word out, you don't get it. All that stuff, I'm just like, it's in my brain a lot. So I think there might be also just some, like you said, buildup of like being attracted to that topic, but also years of taking it in and really like, I do think about music a ton when I'm writing. I have no musical ability besides like lyric writing, but it's always in my brain of like, oh yeah, what would the score be of this play? Where does it sort of like, where's the rest? Like I love in music that moment where the song's moving along and all of a sudden there's like, then we drop to one instrument, or then we drop to just a voice, whatever it is. I'm like, oh, such a cool like little change up they did there. And I'm very aware in early plays, even like where I'm doing that and I'm like, the scene's going along and then no, we're gonna take a little thing over here. So like something about like, I wouldn't know how to teach, I guess, like whatever people's experience or life is with music, like how do you transfer, what do you take from what you've built up over the years inside you with music, and how do you somehow get that to be on the stage? I'm not sure, but I love the idea of just thinking about it, just like, you know, like I guess I get a little sad sometimes when I see someone who's like attempting to be poetic or attempting to be stylish or something, and they're like, it feels like you making it that way as opposed to it just came out that way. Garces and I were working on something, and he said something I thought was really smart to the actors, because some of them who I've never worked with before were like, is there an accent here? Like, what's the language? Like, what is this, you know, cadence we're doing? And he sort of just said like, just say the line exactly as written with the punctuation, with the word choice, and just say it. And once you have the line in you, like you'll feel the rhythm in your body, and you'll start to say it that way, and you'll just learn it. You're almost like you're just forcing yourself to memorize it right there. Like that's the cadence. That's it. There's no like anchor of like, oh, this is like Southwestern or whatever it is. It's just like, but I thought it was smart to just be like, just if you look at the line close enough, you follow it, you'll understand. Be like, oh, I get it. It goes up here, it goes down there, and it ends on this.
Yeah,
I love like the rhythm of things like that. I'm like, oh, like even if it's a play I don't like, sometimes I'm like, oh, that part, that one line, that was gorgeous.
Yeah, totally. I'm glad you mentioned comedians, because I'm also obsessed with stand-up, and I remember when I was in grad school, I had a meltdown in my second year of grad school where I just thought, why am I doing theater? And I went to the library and just read a bunch of books on comedy, like vaudeville routine. I read about early vaudeville. I read about like Lenny Bruce. I read about, I was just like, I completely immersed myself in that. And for me, it was a way of, again, thinking about, can it just feel, because I was like, I wanted to feel like that. Like I wanted to go there. And I'm trying to figure out a way to do that on a technical level, but also because comedy is merciless. Like if it doesn't hit that point, if you don't make the turn there, you don't get the laugh. It really is surgical, and I admire so much studying even now. Like when I see there's so much stand up right now on Netflix and stuff, where it's just like I'm just like analyzing, and also you analyze who's really good at it. Who actually understands how to wield language and how to really wait and how to trust and how to. So much about doing stand-up is building trust with an audience, and figuring out how much you can lead them somewhere, and which is something we do as playwrights too, and how much you withhold, right? How you circle back around themes. So it's totally my jam, but I also think that sometimes the form doesn't get as much love or official credit. You know what I mean? Like I'm trying to thinking back, like on. Studying playwriting, for example, in grad school, and there was never a class in any of them that mentioned stand-up once, not once, right? And I'm thinking back on it, thinking, damn, we should have. Like actually, that should have been something that we addressed, even just once, like in the semester. Like this is a form, and it is actually part of what we can learn from it, because it's the oldest form, which is getting up and telling the story. I can't hear you for some reason, so just.
I keep doing mute when I'm not talking because I.
Oh yes, no worries.
No, but something I think about with stand-up a lot is that like the liveness in a room of a comedy club is sort of like you're more aware in some ways than theater of like we're all here. If something happens over there and it distracts them, like we're all like very like hyper aware. And also something I'm totally envious of with stand-up is that they're getting to talk about the world we were in, the day-to-day world in a very, not like 2 years of development, just like, no, this happened last week, now we're discussing it. And like that immediacy of just being able to like, they can actually keep up and actually show us who we are in a more active current way than I think we are, just because of the slowness of theater or art in general. But I've always been envious of just being in a room and like, they can just say one word and we all know what they're talking about because it just happened. And now we're all in the room discussing it. And whether it's uncomfortable or hilarious or dark, whatever it is, we're like, oh my God, you had to be there on this particular day in this particular moment. And this is where it exists. And I think we as theater artists are trying to recreate that. But like, if you wrote a play 2 years ago, like
good luck. You know what I mean? I mean, literally, some plays take 5, 8 years, 10. Sometimes I never get seen. So this thing of, and then I think there's also something that's so funny, right? Yeah, the facetious question of why now? Why this play now? And I'm like, dude, I wrote the play Why Now like 8 years ago. Now I'm writing the Why Play Now for now. But you're going to see it maybe 8 years later. You know what I mean? It's like we're always on a delay. And something that I think about a lot when I make is I make with the knowledge of that now. Like I sort of, which I didn't when I started. Like now I'm like, okay, I may want to write about the now, and I could still. I'm obviously doing that because you're a writer. You're in the moment, right? But I'm a part of my brain is like, but it won't be presented in the now, so I have to think of a way, metaphorically, to kind of project it forward. And still have this sort of this resonance that I want to have happen. It's like a very strange kind of cluster thing in the brain to sort of try to figure out, but I feel like it's the only way I know of right now of addressing the slowness of theater. because I don't know what else to do. Like, I'm just like literally, except for the rapid response projects that I've done, with Gun Control Theater Action or Climate Change Theater Action or the others that I've done after Orlando, like where those were in the now, that was the whole gist of that was responding to the moment. But I think when I'm writing a play, and I know it's the play and whatever it's going to do in the world, or not, yeah, like I kind of have to step back. Also because they date themselves really quickly, right? Plays date, then plays date. So you are in a sense always writing history plays if you're setting it in a very specific time. But you're also, I'm always trying to liberate it from that. So I'm trying to figure out ways of like, can it withstand? Like, okay, I'm writing for the now. It's sort of like sitting with the play. I'm writing for the now. Let me imagine an audience 10 years from now. Will this resonate with them? And to me, that's like the test. And it's sort of like, I think I became more conscious of it, obviously, because in this business, everything is so slow. But also I was reading this wonderful book on Sarah Kane that Graham Saunders did, one of the many books. He's done several books on Sarah, but one of them is a Routledge companion to Sarah's work. And a lot of it has interviews with Sarah, which I'd never seen before. And one of them, she talks about this, actually in relationship to Blasted, where she said, I felt like that was too specific. And that's interesting because that play is highly metaphorical, but the first act is quite specific, actually. And she said, I want to move. And I think this is when she was writing, I think maybe she was writing Crave, that she starts to articulate, I want to move to a place where it's not completely tied to the present moment. I want to move to a place where I can project it forward and it can still vibrate. And that was like, and then reading that, I was like, okay, cool. That's that's useful information, right? As a writer.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. Like, I definitely have a couple of plays. Like, I have one about a school shooting where I went to school. I mean, I wasn't there when it happened, but that felt very like, it was so surrounding us at the time. Like, I felt like I had something to talk about. But even though it's one of my favorite plays, it's never really gone beyond a reading because I think that it always feels like, I mean, sadly it never leaves, but the topic is so like, almost like now it's really talked about, now it's not. So almost feels like the play was dated again. Like you said, when I wrote it, it was already sort of like, if we happen to be in this time period, this might be interesting, but like by the time it actually got through, who knows? And it almost feels like a gamble in terms of like, is this really relevant? I mean, I think I'm hoping that like I wrote it in a way where, like you said, it's more about people who sort of fall through the cracks in society, and less so about school shootings. But I understand that the frame of it and everything about it is kind of about a shooting. So, but it's one of those, those sad drawer plays where like I'm actually quite proud of it. There's other ones I have that are drawer plays that are like I can get it where I never really, like I never figured it out. But that one I was like, oh, I'm actually quite proud of this one, but I doubt it'll ever actually get seen.
Yeah. Dan O'Brien, who's a writer that we've supported here at the Lortel, who's working on a play, wrote a play about Newtown, right? So this shooting, and he spent a couple of years, it's finally getting a premiere, but he spent a couple of years pitching it. And people were like, it was sort of interesting because he talked to me, he said, oh, a couple of years, people were like, it's too dark. So that was one. But the other one was, that was Newtown. We're somewhere else now. And then of course, there's just been, this country is mass shootings is like become as we breathe, which I think is horrific. And then suddenly people are like, oh, that Newtown play, let me look at that Newtown, you know what I mean? And so I think that also that plays actually hyper specific to Newtown. But it, the resonance of it now feels like enormous, right? All those years have passed, and the weight of all these shootings in this country, especially children, young adults, it's just kind of borne down upon us. So it might be, and interestingly, I think that one theater, it's the Jiva Theater who's premiering it, felt like a way to kind of like, this might be a time to reckon with this, through the lens of Newtown, right? So, but Dan was in that place of like, maybe no one will do it. Do you know what I mean? He had gotten to a point as a writer where he thought, do people think we're past that? Which is a horrible thing, right? To think we're not past compassion, I hope.
That we're writing, that we are in some all writing history plays. is interesting to me because, like, whether it's 5-year history or not, like, in some ways we are based on how the industry works. Like, unless you're, someone who has their plays just go up immediately after you write them. But for most of us, it feels like, yeah, this is going to be a little bit past. And yeah, even in students' play, sometimes if they have a really, really current like reference in there, I will highlight it and be like, that's getting to life now, but I don't know if it will in a couple of years when you actually see this thing. So just be aware of that.
Yeah, one thing I do when I do current references, unless I want the play to be a history play, is that I treat the current reference like an artifact. So I do that a lot in Iphigenia Crashland Falls. That play is full of like references that at the time when I wrote it were already like in the past, but also, we're sort of in pop culture, endless reboot of pop culture. But I did it purposefully. I was like, this is just a historical artifact in the middle of the line. And you can dig at it if you wish. You can be like, find the illusion, or you can, haha, or whatever, however it sits with you. But I want it to feel like we're on an archaeological dig. And occasionally these lines or these words pop up that may never be used anymore are being used at this moment, whether they be a brand name or whether they be like slang or, yeah, I'm interested in language as artifact and that you can, because it's also material, and that we can actually play with that as artists if we're intentional around it. But it also depends on the kind of play you're writing too, that it can accommodate that or not.
Yeah, I think I only have one play that has a cell phone in it. And not because like I'm purposely, I'm sort of just placing things that, you might know, in a sort of heightened space where we don't know, anywhere. But I think only one has that specific thing in it and I don't know if I'm avoiding it on purpose, or there's like, these days there's so many like story things that can be done through the phone. Like, why don't they just call them, or if I'm just sort of like, I like the sort of timelessness of like, we don't know, like, it's clearly not like long ago. It's clearly not right now, but it's sort of in our general generation, but not necessarily like someone has a smartphone. So maybe
Yes.
Even the idea of talking about it, like, I don't feel a desire to write a play with like a smartphone in it, even though that's the world we live in,
It is the world we live in. I mean, I think the one time is it using a smartphone? There's a smartphone that gets smashed to bits in one of my plays. And there's another one where I use the language of texting as like, they're not texting each other in the play, but the language of texting is how they speak to one another. Because I thought, this is sort of interesting, the contractions of words, and sometimes it's just consonants, and like, so I looked at it as a kind of I guess, poetic exercise, more than thinking about it as the phone. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm sort of less interested in, unless the play is happening on the phone, I'm less interested in seeing a phone on stage. And that also is so true for plays with phones in them, by the way, like, old plays with phones in them. Because you also have this thing of like, it's like when electricity first started, you know what I mean? Anytime there's a new gadget, writers start like, a new gadget, let's write a play with a phone in it, and I'm like, dude, who cares? It's just a thing. And it's also just a mechanism. Like, usually it's done for a plot point. Like the phone, like before it used to be a letter, and then that got replaced by the phone, and now it's replaced by the mobile, like whatever, but it's really the function dramaturgically is the same. So the letter that the messenger, the thing, you found it in a drawer. Oh, what did you do? Well, now it's like the phone. Oh, what did you do? It's the same thing. So
ironically, in my play, the phone also gets destroyed. I wonder how many playwrights have a phone in some play that actually gets destroyed on some subconscious level. We're like rejecting that plot device.
We're rejecting. I know, we should do a little survey. Plays with phones that are destroyed on stage. I think for me, it comes from seeing True West at an early age and being like impacted by all those toasters being destroyed, and loving it so much. I was like, damn, like, that's destroy things on stage. It's a great lesson from Mr. Shepherd. We're at time. It's been such a delight, Matt. Thanks for making time with us. What I will do now is do a goodbye here, but I will also, if you could just stay online for a little bit as I hit record and recording, we can say an official goodbye offline. But for those of you who are watching Conversations from the Alcove, stay with us in the series. Check it all out on the Lortel Theater on YouTube. Thanks a lot, and so long.
Thank you. Bye.